Welcome back, everybody, to the Misfit TV, the YouTube channel where we bring entertainment and sports talk straight to you. This is another edition of the Buckets Only podcast. I'm your host, Jay, and this is my friend, Jake. Jake, how are you doing today, man?
I'm doing good. How about you?
I'm chilling, bro. Just can't wait to start talking about this basketball. We had some scrimmages this week, some great
We did.
scrimmages this week. On today's episode, we're mainly going to be talking about some of the standout performances during some of the scrimmages that I just alluded to. One of the teams that surprised or impressed us the most throughout these couple of games, as well as who do we think is more likely to lock up the A seed in their respective conference, the Memphis Grizzlies or the Orlando Magic. So, Jake, we're going to start out with the standout performers. Who is one player that you cannot keep your eyes off of throughout these scrimmages?
I gotta go with Bull. He looked really good in their scrimmages, especially when Denver started him at the three. Because he's a giant. He's like 7'2", 7'3", but he can shoot, he can rebound, he can block. He's he he's almost like a young Giannis in a sense, minus the shooting factor that Giannis didn't have. But he's quick. He can play the three, even though he's a 7-footer, and he's just like he can be explosive. And he's I don't know, man. I think he's got some talent. Especially being a second round draft pick, I think the Nuggets really got a steal out of him. Um, and I think we're gonna see that in the regular season and maybe in the playoffs if they have to use him.
Touching back on like the second round pick part of it, like he's been, under the radar for that team the entire season, hasn't played a single game with their actual main roster, mainly was spending a lot of time with the Windy City Bulls in the G League. I think the game that obviously my man Jake is referring to is the first game out of the gate where my dude dropped 16 points, 10 rebounds, and 6 blocks. And I mean, I guess the big issue, within his game was that most people will point to like the good handful of turnovers, not a lot of activity outside of the blocks. Pretty much if he wasn't putting the ball up, he kind of wasn't very active off the ball. There's a lot of little small critiques that you can make, but it was the first scrimmage back, and you put on top of that, that was their first time with a main roster, and they had what 3 7-footers in the starting lineup, and basically not a single guard on the court. So when you really look at it, I would say that he definitely thrived for the environment that he was in. I mean, Jokic at point guard sounds like a 2K move to me. Sounds like exactly what you should do in a 2K environment. Put a 7-footer that can pass the ball behind his head at point guard and let him do his thing. But I think Bobo, the main thing that stood out to me was the shooting, like you said before. 2 of 8 from three is not great, but the form is there, which means that, his setup, his delivery, if he can get the ball in his spots, which seems to be a lot of like top of the key stuff where he kind of like you said before, almost kind of plays Giannis like. He's not built like Giannis or anything by any means, but like has that aggressive downhill style and likes to shoot from the top of key and stuff like that. I feel like if they put him in the right positions, like you said before, I think we could see some stuff out of him from the regular season and maybe in the playoffs. I think a player that I'm going to start off with is more like the feel-good story, I guess, look at this NBA's return. And I'm going to go with Andre Roberson for the Oklahoma City Thunder. The dude has not played basketball in 2 years. He had a ruptured patella tendon injury back in 2018 and basically has not seen the court since then at all. No live action at all. So his quarantine's been longer than anybody's as far as I'm concerned when it comes to the basketball court. But he came back with some heat. He got in a game against the 76ers, he hit 2 clutch threes down the stretch, his only points of the game, and put them up 102-97 to win the game. Now, 6 points in a game is not something that should be a standout performance. But if anybody who knows Andre Roberson remembers what his jump shot looks like, there's a question as to whether or not he's a better shooter, whether or not he can out, outrank Sean Marion, for example, in worst shooting form ever seen in the NBA. Like, this is a guy who is not known as a shooter. He's more of a defensive stopper. He's been on an all defensive team beforehand, but he came back with a three ball. Jake, where do the Thunder go if Andre Roberson has a 3-point shot? Where do they go if he has the Jimmy?
I still don't think they go anywhere. Like maybe they're like a 5 seed right now. Maybe I still think at best they hold the 5 seed. They have a tough schedule in the scrimmages, and they're not built like the other top playoff teams. I get that the Thunder in general are a feel-good team. They're like the Clippers last year when they traded their best player. They still took Golden State to 6 games in the first round as the 8 seed. No one saw that coming. So maybe they grab 1 or 2 games in the first round of the playoffs, but if you look at their team, even if Roberson comes back with a 3-point shot like he showed in the scrimmage, I don't see them going anywhere. I think they have one of the best young squads in the league with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And I mean, Steven Adams isn't that young anymore, but he's still a building block. I think they've got some good pieces, but I just don't think it can stack up against a James Harden and Russell Westbrook duo or a LeBron and AD, Kawhi and PG. I just don't think they have enough defense to combat that.
Well, that might not be a big surprise, but who is somebody else throughout these scrimmages that did surprise you?
Mikal Bridges, he averaged less than 10 points in the regular season, like before the hiatus, and then he came out and averaged almost 20 in the scrimmages. That was really surprising for me because I think this is like his second year in the league. He looked like he's shown like a little bit of flashes this whole season, but he just kind of wowed me in the scrimmages. I don't think it matters that much because at this stage in the Suns' development, I don't think a core built around Devin Booker and DeAndre Ayton is good enough to take them anywhere. Especially if you look at where they are in the standings, like they're the second worst team. I don't think they have what it takes to even make it to get that 8 seed, but we'll see. Mikal Bridges look pretty good though.
The big thing with Mikal, right, is that unfortunately he's thriving for a team that really their biggest hole is point guard. Whether we like it or not, Ricky Rubio is not the point guard of the future or anything. Devin Booker at the 1, he's not James Harden running that for the Rockets in the past. Devin Booker is a primary scoring option and like one of the biggest threats from his position in the league. And that's just who he is. He's a bucket and not very much past that in terms of facilitating. So unfortunately for a guy like Mikal, his big thing is just coming up as the next good or great two-way wing. I think if you can get a top-end version of Mikal that reaches, I would say, bare minimum Robert Covington level, you have a solid 10-year starter at the small forward position that can be considered an actual two-way wing for their team and is a true building block. When he was just a one side of the ball player in terms of, leading their team in steals or being one of their top defenders overall across the team, especially in that wing spot, it's hard to recognize individual defense as a part of one of the bottom half of the Western Conference teams. Like, you don't stand out as much. But what caught me, like you said before, was his ability to score the ball. That scared me. The way he was able to shoot from 3 was extremely impressive. And I think one of the more impressive things overall from him was his ability to, drive to the basket. I don't know. I guess maybe his 3-point shooting almost made me feel as though, okay, he's going to be a 3-and-D guy as a spot-up shooter that can get it off the bounce or whatever, and that is what it is. But he was really attacking in these scrimmages. Like, he was going balls to the wall and was either finishing or dishing it off late to somebody. And yeah, he stepped up huge. I was just almost as shocked as you were, honestly. It's a good way to segue into our most impressive teams during these scrimmages. And I'm actually gonna let you lead because you made a comment to me off camera about the team that you chose, and it's kind of interesting how it coincides with something you said earlier. So who was somebody that impressed you during these scrimmages?
I was impressed by the Pacers. Oladipo looked good, and Sabonis looked good before his injury. Um, they, I don't, I mean, that like the, I don't think they have very much in the way of making it far, unless they were to grab that 7 seed somehow and drop that far down to play Toronto. I think that would be a cool series. But I think I think the Pacers kind of like they really impressed me. But it just depends on whether we see Sabonis and Oladipo, because Oladipo has still been giving us mixed signals about whether or not he's even going to play. He played in the scrimmages, but he said that he's going to like assess it game by game and see how he feels, because once again he's rehabbing from that injury. And he recently was able to make a comeback, and then Sabonis left the bubble. I think he's back now, and I think he's planning to play. But I'd be surprised if he was at 100% after Woj was tweeting out that it was a significant foot injury.
If he is able to play, and say Sabonis is about 80%, because we have to be realistic. Even with the hiatus, it's still a significant foot injury, as you said before. So say you get 80% of what was like an all-star Sabonis this year. What do you think the Pacers will do, or how long do you think they will be able to last come playoff time?
I think they could possibly make it into the second round. Actually, like I think they're like the 5 or 6 seed right now. I think a first round matchup against either Boston or Toronto would be really intriguing. I think obviously Boston is a much tougher competition just because of their guard play and how they can just kind of swap guys in and out at their own will. But I think that if you look at the makeup of each roster, the Raptors have Gasol and Siakam, and you match that up against Turner, who has the ability to show flashes and can be a good piece for the Pacers. And then you also have Sabonis, who can defend Siakam. And then you look at Boston, who has Tatum. I think that would be a sick matchup to see Tatum versus Siakam in the first round. And then you kind of look at Oladipo. If he plays, he can guard Kemba. I think Kemba's going to be – he hasn't been in the playoffs in a while. I think he's going to really show off and kind of show that he belongs there, and that Kyrie regrets leaving Boston. I think Kemba's got a chip on his shoulder and is going to really carry Boston far into the playoffs, but I still would be excited to see that first round playoff matchup.
So I think going off of that, right, the reason why I made the comment in terms of it being related to something you said earlier in the podcast is because personally, I feel like the Pacers and the Thunder are in a similar boat. I would not compare Domantas Sabonis to Andre Roberson in any sense of the word, but I think the similarity is the thing that they're missing the most comes out of those players. Miles Turner, like you said earlier, is a player that tends to show flashes. There's not a lot of consistency and definitely not a ton of consistency in terms of shooting the ball. He's definitely kind of like a scrappy rebounder and tends to get most of his points dump downs, throwing up lobs, kind of DeAndre Jordan, but a little bit less athletic, I guess I would say. Sabonis is somebody who stretches the floor, gives Miles Turner space, kind of opens things up down low for everyone where it's not too much compact in the paint. So if Victor Oladipo, for example, is playing, he's a downhill player. He's a drive to the rack player. If Sabonis and Miles Turner are down there, Oladipo is essentially nullified out of the fact that he can't do the things that he wants to do. I feel like with Roberson, he gives them wing defenders, or he gives them wing defense that they've lacked all year. They've essentially been playing small ball way before the Rockets made it cool. They just kept centers. They still just had, Steven Adams running at center and things like that. So it just logically still looked like okay, they're a traditional team. It's just their backcourt's a little thinner than normal in terms of how many guys they have running at the same time. They basically use almost their every lead guard they have all in one lineup. I think that those two guys are going to be guys for their team that whether or not they play has a lot of emphasis on, okay, maybe not how far they get in the playoffs, because I think we both have an agreement that they kind of cap out at getting past the first round at best. But I think how many games they get in that first round, if they were say to lose, comes down to guys like those. For the Pacers, I feel like Sabonis not playing may even influence Victor's decision, which might even get them swept versus maybe getting a game or
Yeah.
two off. And with Roberson, I feel as though the OKC Thunder have been scrappy all year. But if you add a wing defender like that, Lucas Dort coming on his own and a lot of guys off the bench getting a lot of minutes, that's a team that could be the difference between maybe getting done in 5 or 6 and pushing games to game 7 and getting past the first round. I mean,
Yeah,
I
I can
think that's
definitely
fair to
see
say.
that.
I guess most impressive team, it's kind of weird to pick them because I wouldn't say that they did anything significant, but I like the Dallas Mavericks right now. Um, this is a team that I felt like was just getting its bearings together before the whole COVID hiatus thing. Um, Kristaps was finally just starting to kind of creep up into that 19 points per game. Luka was already kind of the primary facilitator, and this was his first full year of being able to run as like the lead point guard for their team. Um, this is a team that I feel like if certain guys on their team, like Maxi Kleber, and Seth Curry, who had a extremely nice shooting performance one of these games. I think it was actually against the Lakers, where he literally only played like 15 minutes, but he hit like all 8 of his shots, and 6 of them were 3-pointers. So these are guys that I feel like if they step up in a big way, the Mavs could be putting any and every team that they could potentially match up with in that first round on upset alert, because they are basically flexed between the 4 seed and the 7 seed right now. I mean, there's like 3 teams tied with a record of like 40 and 27 or something like that. And then whoever the 4 seed is has like, I think their record is like 41 wins. So the difference between the 4 and the 7 is very minimal. So I think those guys stepping up is going to be huge. Is there anybody on the Mavericks besides, I guess, Luka, who's the easy one? Is there anybody on the Mavericks that you feel like if they don't play well, the Mavericks have zero chance, like no chance at all?
I mean, I gotta go. So Kristaps, I feel like would also be an easy pick just because he and Luke are the dynamic duo. So if you count him out too, I gotta go with Seth Curry. Like
Hmm.
you said, he. There's actually I forget who talked about it, but a lot of shooters have said that Orlando is gonna be like a breeding ground for shooters. Like people are gonna be. They said that it's because like there's no fans, so there's no background to really distract them. They're just basically looking at like a black border around the court, and something about the depth perception of standing from the 3 point line and seeing the hoop. Like that's why you've seen all of these like Mikal Bridges and maybe Roberson too. Um, and then you mix in Seth Curry, who went 6 of 6 from deep. I think we're going to see a lot of shooters, and Dallas is they're I wouldn't call them a streaky team because they've played pretty consistent this year. But I think their performance is going to heavily rely on guys like Jalen Brunson and Seth Curry, who, if they catch fire and if they can put up some good shots and kind of takes at least a little bit of the load off of Luka and Kristaps, I think that allows them to focus elsewhere, and I think they become a way more complete team and can really make a run.
Mentioned that a lot of these young teams are not going to have to deal with the normal circumstances of not only the playoffs themselves, but even the playoff push. I would say personally, Memphis has the most to lose because they've been the team that's basically been betted against since they kind of started catching the league by storm. But I would say both Memphis and the Orlando Magic came into this season with what I would say little, if no, real expectations in terms of even whether it be making the playoffs or making any kind of run in the playoffs.
Yeah.
Of those two teams, which one do you feel like is more likely to hold their position in the AFC, knowing everything that we know about the other teams vying for the positions as well as what we know about their rosters right now?
I gotta go with Orlando. I would even go as far as to say that I think Orlando can bump themselves up to the seventh seed. When you look at Brooklyn, who won't have KD, Kyrie, I don't think Karis LeVert or Jared Allen or DeAndre Jordan, I don't think they're playing. They're basically a bunch of free agents that their Nets have signed that are going to be playing. Um, I think Brooklyn is going to manage to hold on to the 8 seed, but I think Orlando has the potential because they are pretty much at full strength, I think, where they're going to be able to move up to the 7th seed. Especially if you look at the terms from Washington being able to move up, they're already 5.5 games back, and they don't have Beal, and they don't have Wall, obviously, they haven't had at all this year, and even Davis Bertans, who has kind of been like a feel-good story for them, who popped off this year. I think if you look at Washington, they just don't have the pieces to move up, and they're already 5.5 games back, so they would have to outperform the Nets and the Magic over these next 8 games, even to get within 4 games to do a play-in tourney. And even then, I just don't think they have the pieces to move up. So I'm going to say Orlando is my pick to keep their spot and then even move up to the 7th seed.
So with everything that you listed off, right, it's hard for me to necessarily argue that Orlando has the game on lock. I like Aaron Gordon being their, I guess, pseudo lead player for their team. I like Jonathan Isaac this year. I feel like before he got injured, he was on a first team all defense, maybe even defensive player of the year. If you really watch basketball close, could have got some votes, maybe even won it. Markelle Fultz has finally found his bearings for the first time in who knows how long, because honestly, he's had weird on and off shifts where we kind of thought he was going to be the guy in with the Sixers, and it never kind of came to fruition. And he's finally kind of gotten his bearings, I guess you could say, in Orlando. So with the way their team is set up, I can't argue that they won't be able to hold their position, especially because their record has them favored, I guess you could say, in terms of how you mentioned the Wizards having to pretty much win out to even make it competitive, and Brooklyn pretty much their only route is to blow it, because the kind of players that they have in an 8-game regular season, I have them going maybe 2-6 at best. And I feel like that's just going to do a lot with depending on what certain teams decide to run out there in terms of having guys play and not play. But I'm going to give my argument for why I at least think Memphis will be able to hold their spot. They had a couple of great performances, I would say, individually. There was a lot of team ball taking place in terms of their play of style and their play style. And overall, kind of just seeing their team back on the court, there was a lot of good spurts that show that they're kind of back as a streaky athletic team. But at the end of the day, they didn't really win very many games throughout these scrimmages. So that leaves something to be desired. But my takeaway is that I feel like their worst basketball is behind them now. My thought process is that it's better to shake off the rust in the scrimmages than to take them into the 8-game regular season play out and just kind of muck things up there. I think another thing to take into consideration is we don't know if Zion is coming back for the Pelicans, which I feel like has a lot to do with whether or not they make a playoff push. Because
No,
right now,
he's out of quarantine now.
well, I mean, in terms of him playing, though, because he's already been on limited minutes throughout all of this regular season, and with the quarantine hiatus and everything else, do you risk him for 8 games just to maybe make the playoffs? It's something the Pelicans do have to think about. In terms of the Trailblazers, I like them as a dark horse team to make the 8 seed, but they are backed by a good handful of games themselves. So the way that they operate down the stretch, I feel like it's going to have to do a lot with how Nurkic performs, as well as what they decide to do with Whiteside now that Nurkic is back. Because running them at the same time clogs that lane up way too much. And outside of that, I mean, Dame and CJ are going to do what they do. I mean, we've already made comments in the past that like Dame might drop 50 every day of this entire 8-game regular season, even on days that he doesn't play. So like he's gonna come back with a lot to say and a lot to show. So I mean, with those two teams being the main teams I'm worried about, because I'm not worried about Phoenix, for example, in terms of making a playoff push. I think that Memphis has the setup, and I guess you could say like the moxie to hold it down. I feel like Taylor Jenkins has coached them up well this whole season, and I feel like 8 games just gives them a chance to prove that this wasn't them striking dumb luck or them kind of just overachieving. It's their way of, yeah, it's a small sample size once again, but a way of kind of putting their stamp on the season and saying like, no, we didn't catch you guys off guard. We knew we were going to be here. Am I tripping to think Memphis is going to make it, or is it just like, is it as realistic as I sound like I'm trying to convince you?
I mean, I don't think it's as realistic as you make it out to be. I can still see, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Memphis was able to hold their spot. But I think Portland, as of right now, before the actual 8 games have started, I think they're only 3.5 games out. So based off of that 4-game back play-in tournament, if the playoffs were to start tomorrow, we'd already have a playoff tournament, like a play-in tournament on our hands between Memphis and Portland. And I like Ja. And I like Jaren Jackson. And even Jonas Valanciunas isn't bad. But I just don't think that they have enough favorable matchups against Portland. Especially if you just go head-to-head. I'll take Dame over Ja. I'll take CJ over, who is it, Dylan Brooks as their shooting guard.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not even sure who they'll have at small forward with Justice Winslow out with the hip injury. And then I think Jaren Jackson is able to defend Zach Collins because he's a name that you forgot to mention who's coming back for the Trailblazers. He showed some potential last year. And then I'll take Whiteside or Nurkic, either one of those guys, over Valanciunas. So I think if it comes down to a play-in tournament, that's assuming that if the Trailblazers play their brand of basketball that we have known them to play in the past before this year, I think if they can get back to that brand of basketball, I think Memphis is in trouble. I don't think the Pelicans are going to have enough to make a real push for it. And even then, they're a team that has little to no playoff experience. They are one of those young teams that can benefit and get their young core some good experience. But when you look at their team as like a whole, they just don't have the experience there that I think is going to be needed to make a playoff push.
Well, let's lead that into our question of the day for viewers. Okay, I feel like my question we should pose to you guys is, who do you guys think will lock up the 8th seed in the Western Conference? Jake has made his flawless debate flawless take that Orlando pretty much has the 8th seed on lock, if not be able to move up. But the West is still up for grabs. Who do you guys think is most likely to take the 8th seed through these regular season games? This has been another edition of the Buckets Only podcast with me, Jay, and my friend Jake here. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, and we will catch you on the next one. Peace.